Hello and welcome back to the Undercurrent Stories podcast. I'm Bob Wells. Today is the 28th of February 2025 and we're recording this episode following a tumultuous 2 weeks of news about the war in Ukraine. Beginning with a surprising Putin-Trump telephone call on the 12th of February, followed by President Trump describing President Zelensky as a dictator, Vice President JD Vance's attacks on Europe, and the siding with Russia by the US on 2 UN resolutions. This week, there have been 3 visits by European leaders to the White House, with Macron, Starmer and Zelensky all meeting with Donald Trump. And on top of all this, the UK has just announced that it's raising its defence spending by 2.5% of GDP. However, for all we read and hear about in the news, I wanted to have the opportunity to hear from somebody who is living in Ukraine and what his take is on all this. And so I'm very pleased to welcome back Yuri Yastavny to the show. Yuri is owner of Pravda Beer in the historic city of Lviv in western Ukraine. Hello and welcome back to the show, Yuri.
Hello, Robert. Good to hear you.
Yeah, it's great I can't believe it's 3 years since we last spoke.
Yeah, well, time flies. You know, you have one expectation on things happening and you hope that all these events came. We hope that these events will come to an end sooner than 3 years. We seem to be having some kind of progress. It's hard to say what kind of quality this progress is of, but still there is a lot of development on that topic. Yes.
Just before we talk about the details of the war and the current situation, for listeners' benefit, please could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to run a brewery in Lviv?
I was educated as an economist in the UK and then as a businessman in the Netherlands. And I spent a good, I think, 16 or 17 years in different corporate careers. But it was always in my mind that one day I can use my education and my corporate experience to run my own business. And then the many factors came together. And I partnered with the guys that are my partners currently. They own one of Ukraine's biggest restaurant chains. And we decided to do something that is product-oriented. And we thought that beer is something that fits Lviv very well. It has historical roots in the city. And we decided to give it a go. And we decided to make craft beer, not any beer. And that's what we've been doing for a little over 10 years now.
Since we last spoke 3 years ago, things have moved on and everything. And I think a lot of our listeners would be very interested to hear how the people of Ukraine, and particularly in Lviv, the city, what their everyday life is like. And I mean that in terms of the food supply, energy, water, the constant threat of air raids. And also, are they still working? What's life like on an everyday basis?
Well, when we heard news about wars in, for example, in Syria or before in Afghanistan, we kind of pictured that it's devastating in all aspects, in aspects of gas supply or groceries and stuff like this. We have been doing on that level. We've been doing pretty well, but it's not, of course, without problems and without big problems. Because first of all, we are all in the first weeks of the war. You pretty much work your system. Not even first weeks, but actually months and maybe even first 1-2 years. You work on adrenaline. You are powered by anger and by outrage that you convert into your own human and entrepreneurial and any other energy to continue working towards the victory. Now it has become a marathon, much more than a sprint, of course, as you know that. So talking about normal life supplies like petrol and things like that, it's pretty much business as usual. Of course, Ukraine lost some manufacturing capacities in the east and south of Ukraine, so some brands are not there anymore. They are either destroyed or taken over by the Russians in the temporarily occupied territories. We do have a curfew. Almost all over Ukraine, there is a curfew. You may not be outside between midnight and 5 o'clock in the morning. The closer it gets to the war zone, the longer the curfew is. Here in Lviv, it's, as I said, between midnight and 5 o'clock. Still, if you have a good reason and you can explain why you are outside, for example, you are heading to the train station, you have a ticket to show, then you can still do that. On air alarms, it has been a very troubling story. On my left here, we had a direct hit by a Russian rocket, killing 10 people in the building, which is in my site right now. It's been now renovated. It's about 1,100 meters in a straight line. And I was home with my daughter at the 5th level of my apartment, and this was a very scary experience. On my right, 320 meters, we had another hit of the rocket. That's the story that went in all the news in the world, where a young father lost his wife and 3 daughters. They were my acquaintances. They frequented one of the bars right in this area. So you do have the loss of people. You have air alarms. Your life is pretty much interrupted because most of the air alarms are overnight. The Russians use normally the morning or night or the morning hours to launch kamikaze drones or rockets. But in Lviv, we are pretty far from the action. We are even much further than Kyiv. And you do have a lot of businesses going on. You have taxi services running. You have gas, electricity. Sometimes when we had big waves of attacks by kamikaze drones targeting our electricity infrastructure, we would have power outages. They were planned. There were timetables that you could look up the internet for your area. But otherwise, for 70% in Lviv, because we are so far away from the east and the south, it's 70% life as usual.
And when you get the notification of an attack coming, do you have designated areas? Are there air raid shelters, or are there certain places that in people's houses that they take refuge?
We have you basically have 2 options. One option is to go to your house cellar, which is not a good option because if there is a real trouble, it's not really suited. It's not really a professional kind of shelter. There is a big parking lot at a shopping center nearby, and you can drive in there and stay there. And that's what most people do. It's much safer. It's like 5-minute walk, 2-minute drive, and that's what we mostly use. However, I mean, if that is interesting, we've acquired an unwanted knowledge of sorting out the air alarms into just dangerous and very dangerous. Oh. So basically, what happens in our family life is that I'm following my wife and my daughter continue sleeping. I don't sleep, and I continue watching what's happening when I see that because you can track actually what's going on in the air. And if I see that something is approaching the western part of Ukraine, then we quickly pack up. We get up, we bring a bag with necessary supplies and head to the shelter.
And how do you say you track what's in the air? How do you track that, Yuri?
You have several channels. You have several informational channels on the internet that say what is actually happening. They're not really official ones, no. But apparently some of the guys in the anti-air forces, they say, okay, well, you have like 3 rockets approaching Zhytomyr and they are heading further west, so you are a little bit more alarmed because it's 300 kilometers. And then when they approach Rivne, which is like 200 kilometers from here, then you are almost awake. Well, you're almost heading off your apartment. And when they're really entering the Lviv Oblast, the Lviv area, then you really want to go quickly to your car and drive to the shelter. Yeah.
I know you're in the west of Ukraine, so you're out of the main part of where it's happening. But how frequently are you getting these attacks where you are?
Well, I think last 5 days we probably had 4. So
Oh, right.
basically, we don't have that every day, but some days we have like 3 or 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the people. I'm not. I am talking about the soldiers, but the people who aren't in the military. They must be really worn out with all this now after 3 years. How's their resolve at the moment, would you say?
There is this, the situation is really doesn't give us much choice. Our generation has, you could say it's kind of unfair and it's bad, and of course it is, because it was an unprovoked attack to a sovereign nation. On the other hand, we had, the history knows many examples of that. People, I think maybe in the 20th century, people were shocked when the World War One was approaching. They were probably shocked about the World War Two. They probably thought like we do now. How could this happen in a civilized world? We already drive cars and we already work. Have electricity and stuff like that. It does happen, and many countries had their shares of independence wars or independence efforts before, and this is our turn. We are on the fringe of one of the last empires of the world, and you cannot, if you have that situation, if you live next to the nation that has never been free in their life, has never seen democracy, maybe on TV or maybe traveling to Western Europe or to the US. Then you are very likely to have this kind of situation. So this is our turn. This is our chance. This is our fight for freedom. It's now or never. I don't want my kids to fight in the war, and I don't want kids of my kids to fight in the war. We better do this now and here, which basically, on another note, it's easy for me to say that. I'm not in the trenches right now. Although if I'm called, I will be. But for many soldiers that we support as a brewery, as a business, or as individuals, I know it's pretty much like this. It's now or never. You are tired. You are running of energy. But what's the other option? We don't want to be. We don't want to be Russia. We don't want to. And it's not about being Russia. It's about being part of real dictatorship. It's being part of the neglect for human rights, for all that Russia really stands for in the current world.
And have you had any people within your brewery that have gone on to be on the front line?
Oh yeah, I have more than 10 people actually on the front lines. My head brewer has. If you remember that attack that also touched on the Ohmedit hospital,
yes.
Kids Hospital in Kyiv, that was the last straw for Alexander Tarasuk, our current head brewer, but he's on military leave. He has actually volunteered to go to the front line. But even before that, we have people who started fighting in. We should remember that this war didn't start 3 years ago. Well, this war has been going on for let's say for 300 years. When in Cossack times, from really old times, its active phase has started in 2014 with the annexation of part of East Ukraine and annexation of Crimea. And I have people from my team who started fighting in 2014. And they are fighting again with a new effort. So I think last time we had a good look at this. We counted 10 people, but we had several more drafted. So I think it's 11 or 12 people from a big Pravda team actually fighting.
Yeah. So we obviously over the last couple of weeks, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, things have certainly been stirred up a bit by President Trump. What's your general take on Trump and what he is saying and what he intends to do? What are your feelings about that?
Well, I give 90% of the chance that the world has received a new town lunatic. And 10% that this is part of the big game plan, which is not really likely. So But that's my pretty household take on it. I have to admit I'm not an expert on politics or other things, and I really do not feel the right to comment extensively on what's going on there. What I should say is that Ukraine has paid and is continuing to pay the price to be treated fairly in any kind of process. So we will, in most wars, all the sides sometimes feel as losers, and we might have a finally better solution to the whole thing. But what we will really not tolerate is we will not tolerate to be admitted as part of Russia's influence sphere or something like this. It's our adversary. We are not similar. We might be similar in skin color. Our languages might be similar in something, like Dutch and German, for example, are similar. But the mentality has always been so far away from each other. Ukrainians have seldom tolerated oppression or crooked presidents or things like these. Ukraine has given the world the first constitution. Ukraine has been home to the uprising army in the west of Ukraine. Ukraine has given the Cossack movement that was fighting all the adversaries on all sides. The Turks from the south, the Russians from the northeast, the Poles from the west. And we will actually never accept being decided something upon without our presence, without our take. We have had enough of that in our history. And this is not the time to tolerate that again. And now we have experience with weapons. We have motivation, continued motivation, and we have that strive for freedom that is not going to be put into a deep shelf and conserved for future times. So that is as much as I can say about the situation. And I think, unfortunately, the Trump's team and Trump, they probably live in the previous era when this was the Soviet Union and it was all like mixed in their minds. I do hold a bit of hope, not too much, that might be something like a super smart sequence of events. It's all pre-planned. But I'm afraid that is very, very unlikely.
And how do you think, what's the general feeling about President Zelensky and how he has led the nation for the last 3 years? What are your feelings? And what do most people think in your country about him?
Well, I think the best answer to that is polls, not my humble opinion. He's not been my president of choice at the election time, and he will not definitely be my president of choice in the future elections unless there is really no other decent choice. I think he starting the whole campaign to be the president years back. This guy didn't really understand what's waiting for him with war or without. He really didn't understand what's coming onto him. The way he handles this is also not for me to judge. I think there will be many questions asked to him and to his team why Ukraine was so unprepared on the southern and eastern flank, why the military, the quality of the military was not top priority in the country so close to its dangerous neighbor. There will be many questions asked probably about the current diplomatic process with the Trump team that's going on. I think many things could have been handled with a much better, grown up attitude. However, it's again, I own a small brewery in a relatively small town in West Ukraine. I'm one of the citizens who is spending most of my time, like 2/3, I continue to brew beer. 1/3 I do the volunteering effort for the army, and I cannot give you a good quality answer to your question.
But nevertheless, it's probably an answer that a lot of people would give who aren't politicians.
I think so. Well, I would think so. It's easy to be a politician. World's full of people who know best. I went to a gym this morning and I heard so many fantastic stories about what should and should not be done. But I'm a bit less of an expert, so I really cannot answer that.
Yeah. And what about Ukraine joining NATO? I mean, firstly, silly question, but I guess you want to join NATO. That's the first thing. I'm making an assumption there.
Yeah.
Secondly, how likely do you think it is now?
I think, in the last 3 years, actually in the last 10 years, Ukraine has done leaps forward that were never expected to happen. We had our church recognized. We have received a visa-free travel to Europe. We've stabilized our economy, although not enough, because our tax and our legal system is not reformed the way it should be. And when the war started, there were also miracles happening with many people in the world about giving Ukraine the right of accession to EU. First, we never thought we would have this weapon or this weapon handed over to us, the aircraft, this and that. But then it took a bit of time and effort, and it happened. So for me, Ukraine is definitely on its way to NATO. I think there is not much. For me, it's a matter of time. It may not happen in 5 years. It may happen in 10 years, or it may happen in 20 years. But it's definitely going to happen one day, and it does not depend on what actually Trump thinks, or it does not depend, for God's sake, what Putin thinks. We are, NATO is a military and political alliance, and we have proven that on the military side, we are willing and able to defend what it takes. And defend it's not just defending your land, it's not defending your villages, and your buildings. It's about defending your identity. You cannot be Ukrainian that simply says, we forget Donbass, we forget Crimea. No, it's a Ukrainian territory, it's Ukrainian land, it's Ukrainian soil, but it's much more about Ukrainian identity, about unification, about being a diverse country, speaking many languages, having several confessions within, but the country that values its diversity within, that is enriched by that diversity. Yeah. So it's a bit of a long question, but I think Ukraine is on its way to NATO. The question is when it will take place.
It's an interesting there you mentioned about the diverse backgrounds of people. And one question I would like to ask, and we here in the UK and the rest of the world, we only hear it in the news or Twitter or X or whatever. We're told that there's a proportion of Ukrainian society that see themselves as Russian and would prefer to be part of Russian society rather than European. Firstly, is that true? And secondly, what is the size of that particular group, and what location are they, and what's their demographic, if that's the case?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, if you asked me that question before Russia's attack, I would be comfortably answering that question and probably giving you proportions. Let me say let's assume you asked me that question like 3.5 or 4 years ago. I would probably come up with an answer saying maybe 20% of the population are really adamantly defending their, they really want to speak Russian, they want to identify as Russian, and they want to, they share the values of Russia, they appreciate Putin as a strong guy, all this kind of, Byzantic kind of style of thing that is not really a sign of democracy. But this attack has changed a lot. It has changed people. It has unified people in Ukraine. For what it takes. We have had many. We lost tens of thousands of people, and we will probably lose more. It might be much more. many more. But and that's the huge loss that the country is still taking. You know, my friends, my relatives, they lost lives and they lost limbs and they lost health in this war. Young guys, younger guys, older guys, etc. But what you cannot deny is that this war has brought a tremendous unification. I would say 90% of those potential 20% of people who would support Russia 3 or 4 years ago, they've converted. They've understood that this is really, they don't want to identify with the killers and rapers and that ugly horde that is attacking us. You know.
Mm. That's interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. Well, you know, my wife comes from she's from Kramatorsk. She's been living in Lviv and Kyiv for the last many years, but a big part of her family is from there, still living there or living in Kyiv or living elsewhere, and some of them were a little bit like, you know, looking at different sides. You know, you can look at this side, you can probably understand Russia a little bit, and Ukraine maybe is not always right and stuff like that. But that has ended. You know, they've actually willingly converted to Ukrainian. They totally they hate whatever Russian army brings here. Well, it's not even the Russian army. You know, you have the Russian population that supports what's going on, and it's not the army. In fact, you know, it's the country, it's the people, and it's not about they let it happen. It's not Putin, who is evil. Putin is a continuation on what has made Putin possible. So coming back to your question, that has changed a big way. You would probably have to really dig deep to find people who truly support what's going on, what Russia has brought about to the country.
How do you see peace? I mean, you know, obviously peace, stopping fighting and everything. And I say, how do you think the majority of people see peace? And I'll caveat that by saying that, you know, the things that are put in the press are giving some land up to the Russians, no land whatsoever, going back to where it was before 2014, going back to where it was in 2020. How do you see a realistic peace solution, Yuri?
Well, I think people of Ukraine will not tolerate giving up territories altogether forever and for good, and you know, things like this. This could be a scenario of I don't know. It could be a scenario of I can't come up with an example immediately, but this could be something that I think sooner or later the front line will be frozen at a certain level. I don't think, it pretty much looks that it will be frozen at the moment at the place of the moment where peace talks will come to something. You know, Ukraine will not surrender territories. Russia will probably not want to surrender territories. So there will be some kind of freezing, and then maybe it takes, again, as with NATO, maybe 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 years for the Ukrainian territories to return to Ukraine. And we, of course, we have to do a lot of our homework. We've been attacked because we were weak. We were weak enough to be attacked. We were not rich enough to have a strong army. We were not smart enough to have that army. We were not smart enough to elect people who would do that, who would lead that effort, who would understand the big picture. So we pay the price now. Still, it means that we will have to do a lot of homework. We have to reform, we have to develop, we have to be a democratic country, we have to grow up, we have to foster critical thinking, we have to do the reforms that are long overdue, that not a single president of Ukraine has dared to perform. There is a lot ahead of us, and most of this will, if we do that right, we will get the territories sooner. If we continue to linger, if we continue to be slow and to be not adamant enough, it'll take longer. But territories. I don't want to call it territories. It's Ukraine. But territories tend to gravitate to a stronger peace, to a stronger partner, to a stronger side, and we need to become that stronger side. We have no choice. Otherwise, we 30-40 million people. We will not be able to fight millions and millions of Russians who sit on oil and gas and stuff like that. We have to think smarter than we don't have to sit on our resources. We have to use our brains much more.
What would you say to President Zelensky on his trip to the White House on Friday to supposedly look at a deal for minerals for the US?
I'd say the situation and the sequence of various likely and not really likely events has made you, Volodymyr, the leader of a great nation, great in many regards, in cultural, in scientific, in resilience, and try not to fuck it up. Try to defend the Ukrainian part in you. Try to respect those people who devoted their lives and health to you being able now to be in the US. Don't give up easily. Feel your strength, because we are all behind you.
And what message would you like to say to the people in the UK who will be listening to this interview? And also we get a lot of listeners in the US and Canada as well. What message would you like to say?
Don't give up on Ukraine. We've been through tough times. We are going through the tough times, but we will get over it. We will get over it with vengeance. We will get over it with new understanding of how we should be in the future. We can do great products. We can do great efforts. What we've been doing over the last 3 years is not for money, is not for everyday prosperity, but it's about values. It's something much deeper than just trying to be richer or trying to be more civilized or trying to be more cultured or something like this. It's about values. If we defend that, we'll be the country of at least our dreams, and we'll be the country that you guys will want to travel to, will want to visit, and we will want to appreciate.
Well, thank you for that. And on a lighter note, I'd just like to talk about the brewery, because you make some smashing beer, don't you? And it's exported all around the world. How's the brewery going?
Well, it's a bit. It's not the best time for the breweries in Ukraine, because it's not the best time for consumption in Ukraine. Breweries depend a lot on the general HoReCa business, on restaurants, on bars, and it's pretty depressed by the curfew and by you most of the last year you could not sell alcohol after 9 or 10 or something like this, and that is not really helping. Yeah. On the other hand, we developed 2 lines of business which are like our efforts to diversify. One of them is we started to open small neighborhood pubs, really like small pubs on 30, 40, 50 square meters, good for let's say 30, 40 customers. And we've opened many. We have like up to 10 now, and we are opening more. So we've kind of, instead of building big projects like we have on Rynok Square in Lviv center, we have like big projects with hundreds of seats. We try to make smaller neighborhood pubs, and it actually kind of worked. It worked to the extent that we decided to try and open it elsewhere. And we have opened in September 24, we opened a small pub like that in Lisbon.
Oh, in Lisbon, yeah.
In Lisbon. And we are opening a second one in Lisbon in a month. And we continue to search for locations in Lisbon because it makes commercial sense when it's a kind of cluster concept, when you have 5 or 7 or 10 pubs in one approximate location. We've also bumped up our exports to Scandinavian countries, so we are well in Finland, in Norway, in Sweden, and we are developing our business in the US. So we sent first couple of containers to the US. In UK, we had on and off business with some distributors. So if you guys in the UK know of anyone interested in high quality, award-winning Ukrainian beer, please find us on social media, Pravda Brewery and Yuri Yastavny.
Well, I'll certainly put that in the show notes.
Super.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, Yuri, thank you for this conversation. It's been a very insightful and interesting to hear directly from someone who's actually living in Ukraine.
Thank you, Bob.
And how your experiences of this dreadful war can help us, give us a better insight. And I really hope peace comes soon. My guest today has been Yuri Yastavny. Yuri is owner of Pravda Beer and is based in Lviv in Western Ukraine. Thank you for coming on the show, Yuri.
Thank you very much for hosting me.